So just checking, everybody can hear me, right? Sound check, good. Good evening, and once again, on behalf of the ACWD Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome the public and your participation in this ACWD regular board meeting this evening. My name is Robert Shaver, and I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this meeting either by using the Zoom application or by telephone. If you're participating by Zoom, we ask that you generally mute your microphones unless you're asked to speak. The district secretary may also place you on mute. However, he will unmute participants at the appropriate time when the board is receiving comments. We will be showing the presentation materials as they are presented to the board in the Zoom app as well. And at any time, feel free to raise your hand if you would like to address the board. If you're participating by telephone, again, please put your phone on mute. And you may use your dial pad, *6, to unmute. And if you would like to raise your hand, you can try *9. And the presentation slides from the district's website are available at www.acwd.org. And if you're on the phone and you have access to a computer, you may follow along that way. We do record our board meetings and they are made available for future viewing. Lastly, the board has one closed session item this evening that will be covered at the end of the meeting. When the board convenes privately in closed session, members of the public may remain logged in and hear any board reports once the closed session is concluded. Again, I thank you for attending. That's it, President Akbari.
Great. We'll call our regular board meeting to order. And I will ask the district secretary to take roll call, please.
Sure. Directors Weed.
Here.
Gunther.
Here.
Huang.
Here.
Sethi.
Here.
And Akbari.
Here. Director Huang, will you lead us in the salute to the flag?
My pleasure. I pledge allegiance to the flag,
of the United States
of
of America.
And to the republic
for which it stands,
one
one nation,
under
God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty
and
and justice for all.
Thank you, Director Huang. With that, we will move to item 3, public comments. I'll open it up for public comments. Is there anyone who wishes to address the board tonight? Hearing none. District Secretary, can you confirm that we don't have any members of the public who wish to make a comment?
I can confirm there's no comments waiting for us.
Great. With that, we will move to item 4, the consent calendar. Do I have a motion to add or remove any items from the consent calendar?
I'll move that we add items 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3 to the consent calendar this evening.
And I'll second.
Great, thank you. Roll call, please.
Directors Weed.
Aye.
Gunther.
Aye.
Huang.
Aye.
Sethi.
Aye.
And Akbari.
Aye. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I'll move consent as amended.
I'll second.
Great, roll call, please.
Okay, Directors Weed.
Aye.
Gunther.
Aye.
Huang.
Aye.
Sethi.
Aye.
And Akbari.
Aye. Thank you. With that, we are on item 5.4. Consider appointment of a representative to the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority. And with that, I will turn it to our general manager.
Thank you, President Akbari. Ms. Heides, our manager of water resources, will lead us through this item.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. On November 12th, 2020, the board adopted resolution number 20-066, authorizing continued participation in the Delta Conveyance Project and funding for planning activities over the next 2 years. Additionally, the board authorized the general manager to execute the amended and restated joint powers agreement forming the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority, or DCA, which amended the original May 2018 DCA joint powers agreement and updated the governance structure to align with current participation interest in the Delta Conveyance project. The first DCA Board of Directors meeting following implementation of the amended and restated DCA Joint Powers Agreement will be held on January 21st, 2021, and the district's board and Zone 7 Water Agency must jointly appoint a director and an alternate for representation on the DCA board as the Class 2 member, where Class 2 includes DCA members who receive water from the South Bay Aqueduct, except Santa Clara Valley Water District, which is represented by their own director on the DCA board. The Zone 7 and district general managers have informally agreed on a representation approach that generally alternates representation between the two agencies each fiscal year. To allow for flexibility, staff is not proposing a more formal arrangement at this time. Additionally, staff is proposing that the director position be filled by an agency board member and the alternate position be filled by an employee from the same agency. Because the new governance structure will be implemented in January 2021, and for continuity purposes, staff is proposing that Director Sarah Palmer and General Manager Valerie Pryor of Zone 7 be appointed to serve as DCA Class 2 member director and alternate, respectively, through June 30th, 2021. Director Palmer is currently serving as DCA Vice President and Chair of the Delta Conveyance Stakeholders Engagement Committee, having represented the state water contractors at large seat on the DCA board since 2018. Pursuant to the district's board rules and code of conduct, section 2.2.1.4, the board president is authorized to appoint district board members to serve as representatives of the district to all positions and other groups and organizations, except 1, appointments in which the law requires the action of the full board, and 2, the board determines that the district is being represented on a group or organization by a board member is not in the overall best interest of the district. While the board rules authorize the board president to appoint district board members to the DCA, the board rules do not authorize the board president to appoint board members from other agencies or staff. Therefore, the board is asked to consider the appointments of Director Sarah Palmer of Zone 7 to serve as the Class 2 member director and General Manager Valerie Pryor of Zone 7 to serve as the Class 2 member alternate at this time, and to authorize the board president to make future Class 2 member appointments, including Zone 7 representatives and staff representatives, generally alternating between the agencies on an annual basis. Board authorization of this item will help meet the district's strategic plan goal 2.2, protect existing imported water supplies. So tonight's recommendation is by motion, 1, consider appointing Director Sarah Palmer of Zone 7 Water Agency to serve on the board of directors for the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority as the Class 2 member director, and General Manager Valerie Pryor of Zone 7 Water Agency to serve as the Class 2 member alternate through June 30th, 2021. And 2, authorize the board president to make future appointments, including Zone 7 representatives and staff representatives for the Class 2 member director and alternate to the DCA. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do any of the directors have any questions on this item?
I don't have any questions, but I have some input.
Okay. I'll wait
Yes,
for the
please,
input then.
Director Sethi.
I'd like to hear if there are any questions first.
No. My question would be related to consideration to having a representative from each of the agencies, either as a primary or alternate, every year, rather than having a gap, 2 from 1 year from one agency and 2 the next year from a different agency, where you have that hopscotch effect. I'd be interested in the rationale behind what we're proposing.
Sure. So the thinking was that by having both a director and a staff member from the same agency, it would allow for sort of a seamless filling in by the alternate should the board member not be available to attend meetings. And then by flip-flopping between the two agencies, that would allow sort of equal participation between the two agencies. So that was the thinking. There's a variety of different things that could be done, but that was the thinking and why we made that recommendation.
Well, anything can be changed in the future, but my preference would be to have continuity at the representation, because often as an alternate, I've attended the main meetings in any case, even though not voting, as we do with the oversight board on redevelopment. So that's my 2 bits.
Yeah, and if I also may add to that, Director Weed, the other rationale was just simply efficiency. If there are directors from both agencies attending, say, meetings, it means staff goes too. So this just reduced the staff workload a little bit as well, because staff would be supporting 2 directors instead of just 1.
Okay, well, I know staff, it may be best to have some supervision of the board, but it strikes me that the continuity would be the primary goal here, because so much can be decided. The dollars amounts are daunting, and decisions are made that have ongoing effect. And to look at it every other year, in my mind, it is best to have someone there every year. Thank you.
Okay, what we will do is, assuming that the board approves this particular item, what I can do is have a conversation with Ms. Pryor at Zone 7 and see how they're feeling about this idea.
Thank you.
I got a question or possible comment. Would we consider possibly extending this time frame to the end of the year? We have a potential major change occurring around July. Any thoughts?
Good question.
Before you respond, Laura, could I just build on Jim's comment here? Because it ties in to what I was thinking. I would actually like the board to consider the appointment of Director Palmer and General Manager Valerie Pryor through the end of June 2022. And I say this for a variety of reasons. One is that Sarah has been involved in the Design and Construction Authority since its inception, and she's done a fantastic job, and she's vice chair of the stakeholders group that's out in the Delta and other stakeholders. Her term of office ends, or she would be up for re-election next year. Her term ends the end of June 2022. And I think, for using the same word as Director Weed did right now, for continuity's sake, I really think that it would be best to have her serving through the end of June 2022. We also, there's a large group of people that attend these meetings, and we're still welcome to attend as staff. And then I'm on the the Finance Authority, and Valerie Pryor is one of the board members there too. It's not like we're left out in the woods here, not knowledgeable about what is going on. And it's January right now. We'd have to come back and look at this again in May or June of this year. I would just find it better that we extend the terms through June of 2022.
I would support Director Sethi on this. I think Paul's correct. It would give us a time to look at this. We could go to the meetings if we want. Director Sethi's on the Finance Authority. So I think we're in fine position, and if she's willing, I would say go ahead, see if they can get them to go all the way till next year.
Yeah, as part of being on the Finance Authority, all of us board members are encouraged to be observers of the Design and Construction Authority. We go through all of the presentation materials. We get a representation from Catherine Mallon, usually at each of our Finance Authority meetings. So it's not like we're, two disparate groups that don't know what the other is doing here.
So
Oops, sorry, Ms. Heides.
I was going to answer the question if you like, but I can
Okay,
hold on.
go ahead, because my question is related to logistics about how to do this. So why don't you answer the question? And
Sure. So the reason we picked the end of this fiscal year is simply because the way the JPA agreement is set up is that at the beginning of each fiscal year, we have to notify the DCA of who our representative will be. So we figured through the balance of this year, it would make sense for continuity to recommend Sarah Palmer to continue. We've set it up this way so that the board president, after that, should the board approve it as written here, the board president would have the ability to appoint whomever to represent. So I would guess that there would be nothing to preclude the board from, at that point, deciding that they'd like to continue having Director Palmer represent us. And so I think you could approve it as written today and achieve that and or revisit that when we get closer to July.
Okay, that was.
And that was also our recommendation because, we haven't confirmed availability as well. So we have maximum flexibility, and this does not have to come back to the full board because consistent with the board president's appointing authority in the board rules, we set it up this way.
Okay.
John, with one more question, if I might. Can we determine, will there be or might there be closed sessions? And if there is a closed session, will both the alternate and the primary be allowed to attend the closed session? And that would support, I think, the argument of having a dual representation on each year.
That's a good question. I know they have had closed sessions on the agenda in the past, things like executive director hiring and that sort of thing. I couldn't speak to whether or not alternates are allowed to participate in that. I don't know if our general counsel might happen to know that off the top of his head. If not, we could look into it and get back to you.
So Bob, to test my understanding here, Mr. Shaver, at the end of June, who gets to make this decision on who serves for the following year? Is it our board president, Zone 7's board president? Is it concurrence of two boards?
So the way it's set up is the general managers will consult with each other, and the ACWD board president, if the general managers, sort of agree that say it would be ACWD's turn, would then be able to appoint an ACWD director to serve in that role. If it's Zone 7's term, the way I understand it is the ACWD board member just agrees to what the proposal is. And there's no formal arrangement. So if there was a significant disagreement or some issues to work out, then we as staff would bring it back to the full board for approval or for direction if that occurred.
So,
since this is so critical to both districts, I would prefer that this be brought back to the entire board.
So Mr. Shaver, I do have a question regarding the agreement, the JPA agreement. I thought when we last talked about it, there were language in there that we will be alternating with Zone 7 to be on this. So do we need to modify the JPA if we need or have some sort of additional agreement if we choose to have Zone 7 carry the responsibility till the end of 2022?
No, I don't believe we do. So if you look at the language of the staff report, it says that it's informal, the general managers will coordinate, and if any appointing has to occur, the board president has that role, the ACWD board president, and then whatever mechanism they choose to use at Zone 7. We certainly can bring this back to the full board if the board's pleasure is to have a more formal arrangement. But my recommendation would be, if that's what the board wishes, fine, we can bring it back to the full board for a more formal arrangement. But to allow things to kind of move forward, my suggestion is approve the recommendation as written, and then we as staff will just commit to bring it back.
My recommendation would be to approve the staff recommendation, extending the term for the Director Palmer and GM prior to June of 2022. And my thought was that, yes, we can alternate, but it doesn't, you actually set up discontinuity when you're flip-flopping every year. And it's really to, I think, the disadvantage of the executive director of the board, the DCA board. It's almost like you have to go through a retraining of a board member every other year to bring everybody up to speed properly. If we want to change course, then we can, I was thinking that we would go 2 years beginning in July 1 of 2022 with ACWD. But you have a critical director here who I think needs to stay on the DCA board through the end of her term of office on Zone 7's board, as well as participating here.
So
I think there's a very strong case to be made for this, and otherwise I would just say bring it back to the full board in May or June.
I could. Is not Sarah Palmer in there independently being represented on this board in her current position? So she would be there in any case through the end of her term in 2022.
No,
it's termed out.
Director Weed, they are re-establishing a new board by these different classes.
All right. So
she's not going to play a dual role.
She would not be able to retain her old position in her current function as an independent at large.
no, no, this is actually an improved arrangement in my view from the previous governance structure, because ACWD and Zone 7 share a permanent seat on the board.
Okay, and and I would argue that with staggered terms, with one individual going in for 2 years, flip-flopping in their position as the primary, the alternate, that you get better continuity by having, well, there's some more, and having overlap as well, that we name someone who'll be on for 2 years. 1 year is an alternate, the next year is a primary, and then the other with the other group there. So you have representation continuously by both of our districts.
I could support that idea.
Okay, so we're kind of getting interesting new ideas to consider. So one thing we're not 100% sure of, I believe, Laura, is, say, Ms. Palmer's availability. That hasn't been confirmed, because the thinking was that at the end of this fiscal year, we could reset. And if she is available, and if that's the board's pleasure, I'm just kind of sort of unpacking some of these ideas. So if one goal is to keep Ms. Palmer on this board through the end of fiscal year 21-22, then that can be done within the framework of what is before you this evening, because it provides flexibility as long as the ACWD board president agrees to do so. And at the end of the next calendar year, presumably that will be, that will still be Director Akbari when the next decision point is. And as long as he's fine with that, we can stay with that protocol.
Can we stipulate as part of this, approving this resolution, that this come back to the entire full board?
The board can do whatever it pleases. We as staff are here to do whatever it is that you would like to do. So what we could do is approve, just for argument's sake, approve the item this evening, and then allow me to work with Ms. Pryor on how the ACWD board as a group would like to do this moving forward. And then I think what we would suggest is we come back in June. Because there are a lot of moving parts that are being suggested, and ACWD cannot do this in a vacuum.
Correct. I would just note that the DCA agreement requires the two agencies to concur on our plan.
Right.
I would support that. I mean, we know she's good through this time period, and that would give us an opportunity to actually discuss it with her and see. She may not want to do it, in which case then we're kind of just, you know, so if we just did it this way and come back, visit the item when we have to, then we'll be ready to go.
Yeah, why don't we do it this way? Meanwhile, ask the general manager to have a discussion with Zone 7 to float this idea of, instead of switching every year, we want to switch every other year. So each agency has a 2-year term. So we'll have that discussion and come back to us. If we as a board need to do something different, then we shall, but at least we need to try to run the idea through Zone 7 to see if they are okay with it. Right.
I would be happy to do that. And then the only other request I have for the board is Director Weed brought up this concept of having 2 directors being the primary and the alternate, one for each agency. It would be helpful to know what the full board feels about that concept.
If I could, I was suggesting that there be that we stagger the positions so that Zone 7 has 2 people, but it has a person that's on for a 2-year time frame. ACWD has someone for 2 years, but they're staggered so that we continue and I don't know, and the alternate versus the primary, because I understand could be either a staff member or a board member, so that they're interchangeable.
Okay, so it sounds like what you're more interested in, Director Weed, is the sort of the 2-year commitment concept, as opposed to 2 separate board members from 2 separate agencies serving at the same time. Is that right?
I'm not suggesting that we have 2 separate board members. Because I think we have a staff member and a board member, and I'm suggesting that they need not be from the same agency. They should be from a representative from each, and we can alternate that on every 2 years. Every year we stagger it, but you have continuity, that you have some representation from your board, from each of the boards on continuously, is either a primary or an alternate.
Okay, so let me just check this to make sure I understand. So what you're suggesting is, if it's agency A and agency B, for 2 years, it would be AB, where A is the primary, B is the alternate. And then the next 2 years, it would be BA. And you're not that concerned about whether it's staff or board members in these roles.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
And I think Director Weed also, if I understood you correctly, wanted to stagger each of the representatives. So you don't have a completely new face to both agencies at once.
That's correct.
Okay, just so that the full board knows, the reason why staff chose the 2 representatives from the same agency at the same time is to avoid misunderstandings in case one, it could be awkward, say, if the primary is from Zone 7 and the alternate is from ACWD, and the primary misses a meeting, so the alternate fills in and then, makes a vote or something that causes some issues. That's why we thought it was important to have continuity the other way, but we're happy to do it any way the board wants.
I would argue that you want the best way to be assured that you have full knowledge of what's going on is to have a representative from each agency, either as a primary or an alternate.
Okay.
Can I ask a clarification question, President Abari?
Yes.
So question for staff, even without being the Delta Conveyance Design Construction Authority being appointed as a representative, we still attend all the meeting, right?
We will still closely monitor all the meetings. Director Weed pointed out something though about closed sessions,
Right.
and that's where it's nice to have a seat at the table.
But at some point, there should also be some trust, right?
The good news is that both of our agencies share
Common
a
goal.
lot of interest, given that we're both on the South Bay Aqueduct. So I'm not that concerned that the agendas will deviate very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Heides, do you have any information?
No, we're the only seat, I think, with just 2 agencies. So we're in a good place to be in fairly good alignment.
Yeah, not the best where you have a permanent seat, but almost as good.
I do want to take a moment to open it up for any comments from the members of the public. Are there any members of the public who wish to make a comment? Hearing none, I'm gonna ask the board, is there a motion on the table?
I'll make a motion to approve the staff recommendation as
I'll
is.
second.
Great, roll call please.
Great. Directors Weed,
With the understanding that this is still open to discussions and negotiations, aye.
okay. Directors Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and Akbari.
Aye.
And staff has received the message loud and clear that we will be bringing this back to the board.
Great. All right, let us move on to item 6. Moving to item 6.1, board committee reports. Are there any directors who would like to ask any questions or have comments on any item under 6.1?
None from me.
Any members of the public? Item 6.1? Hearing none, moving to item 6.2, operational reports. Are there any directors who wish to make a comment or ask a question on item 6.2?
The hardness map continues to look good.
The rainfall doesn't, however.
That is true.
We are still below the 75 through 77 curve.
Are there any members of the public who wish to make a comment on item 6.2? Hearing none, we will move to item 6.3. And item 6.3.1 is the Advanced Metering Infrastructure State Revolving Fund Loan. And with that, I'll turn it over to our general manager.
And Mr. Wunderlich will be providing a brief report on this item.
Great, thank you, Mr. Shaver. And Mr. Warren, if you could go ahead and advance us to the next slide. So really what we're trying to do this evening is just confirming the amount to borrow in the state revolving fund. This is something that's come up at a series of meetings in the past, and most recently in our financial workshops. Next slide. The reason we've really been focused on the state revolving fund is really this first bullet point. It's the subsidized interest rate set at 50% of the average rate for state financings in the prior year, currently 1.4%, and that does work just like a fixed rate mortgage. It's not like a bond financing where there's premiums and other kind of complicating factors. So this is a great rate, will save us a lot of money compared to a typical bond financing.
Mr. Wunderlich,
Next.
just a real quick question.
Yep.
Is the 1.4, is that 50% of the state average, or is that the starting point?
No, that's the 50% of the state average.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And if the district were to issue its own bonds today, we would expect what we think of as a true interest cost. So if you're never able to refinance, what's the net rate you pay over the 30 years, to be somewhere on the order of about 2.7 or 2.8%. So this is about half of what we could get ourselves. All right, next slide. So the board did take prior action to authorize applications to both the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Typically, the Clean Water program is geared more toward sanitation agencies. Now, we did learn a few months ago that the Clean Water Fund was fully subscribed. And when we heard that, we were expecting to subsequently hear the same news on the Drinking Water program. But we did recently hear that we are able to move forward with our loan application this fiscal year. And that's why we're bringing this to the board this evening to confirm the amount. Next slide. Thank you. Our financial plan assumes that we'll borrow $19.5 million to help finance the AMI project. We do have close to $40 million in total contract or project expenditures that would be eligible for financing. Our current financial plan is that these remaining expenditures would be paid for with the district's reserve funds as planned in the financial model. And once this loan amount is set, that's it. It cannot be increased, right? So we can't come back to the state board a year later and say, hey, we'd like to borrow 25 million instead of the 19.5. Next slide. And so the staff recommendation is just to confirm the current financial plan and proceed with the loan application for 19.5 million. This does not require any action by the board because previous action did authorize the general manager to pursue a loan in an amount up to 31.8 million. Now, if there is a subsequent desire for the district to borrow more money for this project, given that once an amount is set here, that's it for this loan, that could still be accomplished either through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund or district issued debt. We could still finance remaining aspects of the project with bonds issued by the district. And if we wanted to do that, the ideal time to do that might be in conjunction with refinancing the 2012 bonds, which we can do next year. And the district or the board has already made all of the necessary resolutions to allow that to happen. That was a part of setting everything up to participate in the state revolving fund program. I would caution, though, that the Clean Water program is somewhat of a long shot because it's typically geared towards sanitation agencies. So we would be a relatively lower priority for that program, even though we do meet the kind of the minimum requirements. So that's my presentation for this evening, and would be happy to take any questions.
Do any directors have any questions or comments?
John Weed. If we have to borrow money beyond the state revolving fund, we looked at the potential and the viability of a loan guarantee through WIFIA at the federal level, a federal financing guarantee.
So we are, we are aware of the WIFIA program. That's not one we have looked as closely at for this project, but certainly if we were to look at borrowing more money, we could absolutely look at our ability to participate in WIFIA.
Second, they have the water loss legislation, which is really non-revenue water that they're trying to reduce by putting in the solid state meters and replacing the positive displacement meters. We're going to achieve, I think, the goals which the state is placing on us for reducing our non-revenue water. Might we be able to apply for funding to support the replacement of the meters with this more accurate meter?
Right, so I think you're suggesting maybe might there be some grants available because of the assistance provided here with reducing non-revenue water. And I know our grants team is looking at various options related to the AMI project, but that's not something I can give a definitive response to tonight as far as related to water loss.
We have the water loss legislation, and it'll be interesting to see what, if any, funding will be available to support that legislation.
Thank you, Director Weed. Any other directors have any questions or comments on this item?
I have some comments, please.
Yes, Director Sethi.
Yes. So I shared this at our LICA meeting on Tuesday, and again, Mr. Shaver and Mr. Wunderlich went back and forth with me today, so I'm sharing this with the board. There are a number of grant program opportunities available from the California Energy Commission, not only for energy efficiency, but also for greenhouse gas reduction. So I'm hoping that we will take a look at those programs. There have been a number of water districts in California that applied under the same program that were able to demonstrate how many truck rolls they were going to be able to reduce over a 20-year period of time, and the reduction in greenhouse gases. And I think the city of Modesto or Manteca, one of them, got over $2 million in grant funding just for that one aspect of the program. And there are other grant opportunities within that same agency for solar as well. So I would encourage us to look at all of those grant opportunities.
Great, thank you, Director Sethi, and I can let you know that our grants team has received that, and they are starting to look into these programs.
Wonderful.
Great, thank you, Director Sethi. Any other directors wish to ask a question or make a comment? Hearing none, are there any members of the public who wish to ask a question or make a comment on this item? Hearing none, I believe there's no action item on this, correct?
Correct. There's no action required, and I think based on what I heard, we will proceed with the $19.5 million loan application. And as mentioned, should there be a desire in the future to borrow more for this project, there are other options, and we can look at that in the future.
Mr. Wunderlich, is there any expectation as to when we will find out, the determination on this application?
My understanding is that the green light to kind of give them the amount and finalize the application essentially means that it's approved, that it's more of a formality at this stage.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm very optimistic, and the timing of this is, it doesn't work like bonds. They're not just going to cut us a check for 19.5 million. As we spend money on the project, it will be reimbursed by them up to the loan amount.
Great.
Great. Well, with that, I will move on to item 6.3.2, earthquake insurance discussion. And I will turn it to our general manager for a presentation.
Sure. Thank you, President Akbari. This is a continuation of a discussion and a debate that the directors have had regarding whether or not the district should consider purchasing excess earthquake, flood, and business interruption insurance. Jennifer Solito, our Human Resources and Risk Manager, I think will get us started on this, and we'll see what the board's pleasure is regarding this, this opportunity. Jennifer?
Good evening, board. We are back with the earthquake discussion. So I'm going to do a little brief kickoff, And then I'm going to have Justin Porter, who's our Workplace Health and Safety Manager, go into the meat of the presentation. You met Justin back in August when he helped present this topic, and he joined the district again in May. So he's pretty new to the earthquake coverage. He's been instrumental in getting us through the pandemic, and we'll see where you guys end up on this topic tonight. So just as a reminder, in 2019 and it started in 2019 and then again in 2020, the board had a series of discussions regarding the purchase of excess or dedicated earthquake, flood, and business interruption insurance coverages. So the most recent discussion took place in August, and the board requested staff return with some additional specific coverage quote options and requested some other additional information, which Justin will cover. So we have worked again with Aqua JPIA, that's our insurance provider, and are returning with that information tonight. And joining us again, we have Debbie Kybers from Member Services from Aqua JPIA. And you've seen Debbie before. She's been in all the presentations we've had on this topic. So if there are any kind of in the weeds questions, we're going to defer some of those over to Debbie. So for the agenda, we're going to go through, Justin will provide a little bit of the history. Again, review our current coverage and what we've already discussed, just because it's been a little bit of a while. Then we'll provide you the new quote information that was requested back in August. And just to kind of give it away, I guess, and not wait for the climatic end, our staff recommendation this time is actually going to be to not move forward with excess insurance coverage. And you'll sort of see why we get to that finding as we move through the presentation, but you'll see some of the quotes have increased. As we talked in last August, it is what they call a hard market. It's been pretty difficult to even get the quotes that were requested, and Justin will detail what modifications were made to get where we are tonight, and they're very costly. So I want to kind of set the stage as we move through this. So move through the presentation, and I'll pass it off to Justin.
Good evening. As a reminder, for those of us who were in attendance last August, and for those of the public who were not, we'll just have a brief overview of the previous discussions on the matter, as well as our current coverage. And then finally, we'll move on to the board's questions and quote requests. As a very brief recap, the board engaged in discussion about potentially purchasing excess earthquake and flood insurance coverage as a result of the RFP process conducted in 2019 for all district insurance coverage, in which the district also received response options for coverage in addition to our standard coverage. During that RFP process, the district transitioned from SDRMA as an insurance provider to Aqua JPIA. During the most recent discussion, which took place back in August, staff provided information to the board on the results of the risk study the broker conducted in order to provide specific coverage quotes, and also information staff gathered regarding other agencies' experiences with earthquake events. And finally, we discussed business interruption coverage options. Next slide, please. As a reminder, the district does have minimal earthquake coverage provided through the standard property and liability coverage program we are currently part of, and the amounts are shown here. This coverage is shared by the entire pool of participants and does meet the minimum requirements to receive FEMA reimbursement after a disaster event. Next slide, please. Also previously discussed were two options for $25 million in earthquake coverage. One, joining a shared pool for coverage, or two, a dedicated ACWD specific policy. These figures have been updated since August's meeting to the current hard market conditions as discussed in the previous presentation. Next slide, please. So who is currently in the pool? There are currently 282 members participating in the base pool program. This slide is a repeat from August, indicating who is currently in the $25 million shared pool policy. There are 8 agencies participating in the group purchase program of $25 million. Next slide, please. The map is also to indicate where the group purchase shared pool agencies are located. So these are the same agencies that we had on the last slide. Next slide, please. Our direction following August meeting was to get an exact quote for adding $50 million of business interruption coverage to the $25 million earthquake quote based on the same insured properties as the initial $25 million earthquake quote. As a reminder, standard business interruption does not cover the peril of an earthquake. The only way to get business interruption coverage specific to an earthquake event is to purchase a specific policy and schedule the income, which is what this proposal would do. Next slide, please.
So I'm going to jump in on this one because Justin this conversation predates when he was with the district. So I think in the last board session, there was a question as to what properties we had included to be specifically scheduled on the earthquake policy to get to that premium that you saw on the previous slide. So this slide shows everything in a high level that was included. What you'll see on the next slide is a general summary of what wasn't included. So generally what was included was a focus on distribution service, not necessarily on supply, except for the treatment plants, which is why in the next slide, you'll see that the rubber dams and some of the other facilities that either aren't commonly used or have been decommissioned aren't included on the insurance. However, if the board does decide to pursue any of the excess coverage options that we've gone through today, this is very malleable. And we've already scheduled so much, even if we were to add a few properties, it wouldn't substantially change the quote. Similarly, if we were to remove some of these, it probably wouldn't substantially change the quote, but it could reduce it slightly. So go ahead to the next slide, please. And this is the list of the items that weren't scheduled, things that we don't necessarily aren't critical for operations, such as carports. We didn't put most of TP1 there because it's not operational, but some of the TP1 facilities were included where we still have staff and things located there. And then you'll see some of the wells and things that aren't currently used or aren't sort of critical for water supply. And then as we've discussed before, the pipes, I believe it's only 1,000 feet between from a scheduled property, those pipes are covered, but the majority of the pipes for distribution would not be covered. So that would still be a pretty substantial cost down the road. So back to Justin.
As a reminder, as the board considers this cost quote, and as previously discussed, here are the additional sources of funding the district will have access to in the event of a disaster and earthquake event. These include the district's maintained line of credit, cash reserves, insurance funds from the shared pool that we have through our standard coverage program, potential FEMA disaster reimbursement, and potential Cal OES funding. Next slide, please.
Quick question on the best slide, if I might. Under FEMA disaster funds and relief, do we have any examples where FEMA has not stepped in and reimbursed agencies, public agencies, to bring their facilities up to par? And when they do those reimbursements, they first deduct any insurance premiums you receive, whether they be primary or supplemental.
I'm not aware of any in the disasters. I think we looked at Paradise fires, the Napa earthquake, and 2 events down south throughout the course of this discussion. I don't recall any agency saying they were denied FEMA funding. Generally, it was just the time that it took to get the funds.
And the question on timing. It took San Francisco 25 years to settle their Loma Prieta claims, but their records were a disaster. My understanding is we have worked to get our records in line with the FEMA requirements, and those in districts which do have their records in order found expedited response, have they not?
Yes, for sure. If we can prove that we have everything buttoned up, that would make it much faster.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of questions for the staff here, Director Sethi. If you can go back to slides 10 and 11, I'm curious as to which of these properties or sites are covered under our normal property liability insurance?
All of them are. We went through the exercise of trying to select only certain properties for this specific earthquake quote to try to reduce the cost, because we knew it would be expensive, and some things we thought, like the carports, TP1, we maybe didn't need to cover. It might not be so critical for a recovery.
Yeah.
But all the rest of these, everything listed in both of these sites are already listed on our standard property liability coverage.
And do you know what the limitation is on insurance reimbursement? Is like 100% of the replacement cost or a fraction of that?
I believe it's 100%, but Debbie, is that incorrect? And it is replacement cost. It's not.
Yes, the coverage is based on replacement costs. You have a deductible that would be deducted, but other than that, it is 100% replacement cost.
Okay, and I wanted to just double check here on the rubber dams. When we were with Sidrama, and several years back, we had the vandalism that forced us to replace one rubber dam. We ended up paying for that entire cost because it was not on our schedule of property liability claims that we could make. And only after the fact did we learn from Sidrama that if we'd only had it on the schedule, could we have received reimbursement for the replacement cost. And I think it was, what, $3-4 million in that range. So I'll just make this comment. I was trying to encourage us to take a look at the extra $25 million or $50 million of business insurance. But now that I see what the costs are, and I didn't expect it to be this high, I actually concur with the staff recommendation. And I am especially pleased that we already have our property liability insurance covering these sites and buildings and everything else. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, we triple checked that the dams were listed when we made the move from SDRMA to Aqua JPIA from that hard lesson. They are definitely on there.
Oh, there was one other question I had. Are we going to cover all of our solar installations with on our property liability schedule too?
I haven't been a part of those discussions, but we definitely could.
Yeah, I can just jump in there real quick. The solar arrays themselves that are being contemplated under our clean energy program are actually owned and operated by the solar developer. So they're responsible to protect and insure them. Of course, the underlying properties are ours, and they are included in the list of assets that are insured.
Mm-hmm.
And if I may add to that, it's generally our responsibility as a district as we add new facilities, solar facilities apart from that, because as Mr. Stevenson indicated, that responsibility is pretty much outsourced to others. But, it's our responsibility to keep our provider, up to speed as we add assets.
Just out of curiosity, when you were getting requests for quotes here, did you get any feedback on whether other utilities purchase business interruption insurance at all?
I'm going to defer that to Debbie. And I want to clarify too, maybe Debbie, you can explain this, because our initial request, following up from the board's request, was $25 million dedicated earthquake. And that's what we had already been discussing. And then we wanted to add to that $50 million business interruption due to earthquake. But it sounds like, and I'll let Debbie explain this better, that we actually couldn't get both of those things. We could only get a $50 million period. That was the maximum limit any that we could get for anything. So that $50 million would cover earthquake plus business interruption, but we weren't able to actually get like 75 million. So Debbie, is that accurate? And then can you answer?
That's correct. To the first part of the question, on the regular property program, some agencies do declare a business interruption limit and some don't. It's just really a personal preference. But then specific to the earthquake proposal that we provided, because we're in a hard market, we have limited availability, limited capacity as far as the carriers. We could not find a carrier to provide a 50 million only dedicated business interruption limit. The most that we could do was get a 50 million total policy limit that would provide some coverage for property damage due to an earthquake and some business interruption.
I guess what I'm asking more directly is, do we know if East Bay Mud or Santa Clara Valley Water District carry business interruption insurance to the limit?
I have not asked. We asked them about the earthquake and neither of them had that, but we can, I haven't asked about the business interruption, so I need to follow up on that.
They do have earthquake insurance?
They do not. No.
Oh, do not?
It's pretty rare, actually, that agencies have it. And even in our findings, I don't recall if we discussed this in the August, but we reached out to an agency down south that had experienced an earthquake and had received FEMA funding. And as a result, they were then required to get insurance on the properties that had been reimbursed through FEMA. But subsequently, because it is, as you can see, very expensive, that agency was even able to get approval to drop their insurance as cost prohibitive, despite that FEMA requirement. They worked with, I think, the insurance commissioner as well as FEMA. So
yeah,
even agencies that have had it or maybe should have it per FEMA have dropped it.
Well, when I originally brought this to the board, it was because I was on the FEMA website after some of the fire events that had occurred. And I was reading through disaster preparedness and what to do in case of an earthquake. And their recommendation was get earthquake insurance and the maximum business interruption protection that you could get as an agency. That's on their website.
That's probably like the most risk adverse, and it would reduce the amount of funding they would have to provide, but it's very expensive for the agency to do that.
I can see that. So I, for one, am supportive of the staff recommendation, and thank you for doing all the research. I feel like I put everybody through the grinder here.
I learned a lot about insurance in this process.
During all of our conversations with folks, did we have any indication as to what drove the cost levels to where they were? Was there scuttlebutt out there that we could kind of monitor for future?
I'll defer that to Debbie since you did the sourcing.
Part of that is due to the hard market. Insurance carriers do not want to write earthquake in California. There are some carriers that won't write any coverage in California right now. The insurance market has its ups and downs, so we're at the hardest part of the hard market. We're hoping in the next 5 years that we'll see a downward trend and that markets will open up. Another part of the cost, driving the cost, is the amount of values that you want to have covered. Obviously, the more values you put in, the higher the premium is going to be. So those are two of the major cost factors.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from directors?
Just a quick comment, like Director Sathi, I'm perfectly fine with staff recommendation also.
And likewise, I'm also in favor of staff recommendation. Are there any members of the public who wish to make a comment or ask a question? Don't believe we have any members of the public who want to ask a question on this item. So
Let me
sorry,
just ask one quick comment on, if I might.
Yeah,
I'm
go
thankful
ahead.
the board and the staff have come around to this position. I would note, though, that in any case, that some of our most vulnerable and expensive responses are going to be in the 12 up to 1,200 main breaks that we might experience to be repaired in hopefully 30 days. That's a huge expense, which is not covered by this in any case. What we really, I would hope, would look at is taking money and starting investments in ways that we can improve our ability to withstand a major catastrophe and continue operations. And that's improvements and changing our method of operations, greater reliance, or the capability of having greater reliance on the groundwater reservoir. Looking at water reservoir storage in the area, but the great reservoir we have is the groundwater reservoir. And then being able to connect to that and serve the areas. Fire protection, wells throughout the district. A variety of ways we can do things and make investments that would make extraordinary advantages. On the solar panels that came up as a note, I would ask us to take great care in looking at putting any solar panel on a roof, whether it be an existing roof or a replacement roof, particularly if they're going to be under separate ownerships and liabilities. Roofs are not a really good place to put solar panels. If you want to put solar panels, look at standalone facilities that are not tied to the existing buildings. And they can be put over parking lots, et cetera, which is a more common practice now. But the changing and requirements for insulation, et cetera, I just went through this with the building I own, where when we looked at it, the strong recommendation was do not put solar panels on. You've got to meet an R30 now, and who knows what it'll be in the future, and you don't want to have to fight around the solar panels. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Director Weed. Does staff have enough information from the directors to move forward?
Yes, we do. No board action is required on this item.
I want to
Wonderful.
thank Mr. Porter and Ms. Kybers for some really good quality research here. I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Moving on to item 6.4, General Manager's reports. We'll move to item 6.4.1, update on the COVID-19 pandemic. And I believe there's a presentation.
Yes, Mr. Warren, thank you. Next slide, please. So this is my typical monthly report that I've been providing to the board regarding COVID-related issues. And next slide, please. Our objectives remain the same: keeping employees safe, providing the essential services that we do, prioritizing if needed, and supporting our employees and their families. Next slide. Unfortunately, statewide conditions are not good. They have degraded significantly since November, as you can see in the map, with regional stay-at-home orders enacted all over the state. Next slide. In a more local sense, Alameda County, these are the metrics that the health department uses to determine what tier we are in during the pandemic. And as you can see, we pretty much hit a home run here with metrics that are higher than what would be to get us to the next lower tier. So we will probably stay in this situation for a while. Next slide. In terms of the district's current operating environment, as I mentioned, their regional stay-at-home order exists. However, the greater Sacramento region is coming off of it and going back to a purple tier. Technically, we're above the purple tier level right now in Alameda County. And one of the reasons for that is ICU availability, now almost to zero at 0.7%. So it's not a good time to have a heart attack or to get into a car accident, I recommend that you avoid doing that. In terms of the district itself, we've had 3 additional confirmed positive cases since the last time I talked to the board, 2 over the past week. In terms of where these cases have occurred, we had 1 employee that reported to water treatment plant number 2. Of slightly less concern is when we have work from home employees get positive, because the issue of spreading it to other district employees is minimized. And then most recently, we had 1 employee that reports to headquarters. And when this happens, Jennifer Solito and Justin do contact tracing. They've both been trained and certified by Johns Hopkins. And we reach out to all the potential employees that have been contacted and let them know. And in most cases, employees go get themselves tested. But the district also can ask employees to get tested at our provider. And over the holidays, that was becoming more challenging because of the turnaround times for getting test results, because of the large scale of individuals requesting tests at that time. So most recently, Jennifer found saliva tests that we can order, and they're interesting because the way they work is a person collects a certain amount of saliva in a vial on their own, because they're given a self-contained kit that includes the vial, a FedEx envelope, and instructions. And then that envelope gets mailed to the lab via FedEx next day air. And we get results within 48 hours after the lab gets the kit. The lab is located in Kansas. So the turnaround is similar or better than what we've been experiencing from local medical providers. We ordered 20 tests initially as a trial. For reference, since the pandemic started, only 20 employees requested testing through the district service. So it seemed like a relatively, safe number of tests to order and see how it goes. In terms of cost, they're $140 per test. To give you an idea of how that compares, Concentra, who is our current provider, charges $225 a test. So it's cost effective, and the accuracy is supposedly the same as the nasal swab PCR tests, which is 98-99% accuracy rate. So as I mentioned, Jennifer proposed this. I believe we have the tests in stock now. I don't know if we've actually issued any to employees, but this just gives us additional flexibility to get some relatively quick test results back if we're backed up locally. Next slide. In terms of the governor's update, last January 11th, for vaccinations, California has not been doing a stellar job so far. And I think what the conclusion is the state has been spending a significant amount of time sort of slicing and dicing the demographics to try to, get the prioritization just right. And now what the governor has decided that if you're 65 and over, you can get vaccinated. So that will result in mass vaccination centers being implemented. You may have heard about that recently in the news, and start getting lots of people vaccinated, because the logistics of tracking and maintaining the cold storage for sort of micro facilities for people to get tested is very complicated. And I think the hope is that California's numbers in terms of vaccines administered will go up significantly, because right now I think we're at about 2 to 3% of the population. Next slide. So in terms of our own operating status, we're doing okay, but as I mentioned in previous reports, everything is a little more difficult. And what we don't want is dry weather conditions persisting, as Director Sethi mentioned earlier, because a drought would just complicate things further. So I'm going to do my part. I'm going to wash my car this weekend, and usually that results in rain. So that's what I'm hoping for. And in terms of opening up, we are looking at our post-COVID delinquent accounts planning still. We'll come up with a plan for that. And we've also developed a preliminary vaccination plan for our own employees, where if there's not enough vaccinations available for all district employees, we've prioritized. And we'll be kind of rolling that out to staff to let them know what we're thinking as management over the next few weeks. Next slide. I mentioned the vaccination priority plan. We have informed staff that they should expect to continue teleworking, those that are, through the end of the fiscal year. I think in the next few months, we'll reevaluate that timeline to see how it's going statewide, what the situation is and how the vaccinations are going. We're also likely going to ask employees that have been vaccinated to let us know, let the district know. And the reason for that is it will help us assemble teams in a way that maximizes the reliability of district staff. And so I'll provide another briefing at our February regular board meeting, and I'd be happy to respond to any questions that any of you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. Any questions from the board?
I actually have a couple questions for Mr. Shaver.
Yes,
Can you go
Director
back-
Huang.
Can you go back to slide 6, please, Mr. Shaver? So for the first question is regarding cleaning. We have 2 employees that actually reported to work that tested positive. Have we cleaned the work areas?
So Ms. Salito is here, I believe, still. Jennifer, do you have any additional information about that?
Yeah, we did one in December that was at the treatment plant where there was sort of a continued exposure and exposure to other staff. So we did work with facilities to get more of a, what I would call a deep cleaning, more than what would be the standard overnight cleaning.
Okay.
The second person was not actually at headquarters for very long at all. There's someone that typically worked from their truck, came in briefly, get some documents and left. So there wasn't much of a facility exposure in that situation.
Okay. So that answered the cleaning question. The second on the slide, Mr. Shaver, you highlighted some operational issues. Out of curiosity, what operational issues?
Oh, you caught that. So for what it's meant is when you have an employee that tests positive and you do the contact tracing and some employees quarantine or get tested as a result, it has resulted in a little bit of scrambling to make sure that we have proper coverage. So that's what I mean by operational issues. There hasn't been any significant reduction in service or anything that a customer would have seen. There's been no risk to water quality or anything like that. It's really like within the framework of what I mentioned before. We're getting everything done, but everything is a little more difficult.
Okay.
So that's what I meant.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that is clear on the record that is the operational issues related to us with staffing and coverage, not with water quality or quantity. So thank you.
That's absolutely correct.
That's it. Thank you very much, President Akbari.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from directors?
I don't necessarily have a question. It's a comment more than anything else. Is this report is my company, my office is experiencing similar issues. And yes, it causes operational issues. We're having people recently more than previously. The one thing that bothers me considerably is the fact is I understand that there's actually vaccines sitting around, and that's why they opened it up to 65-year-olds. And I consider our water district employees very essential service people. I consider my transportation guys in the front line when it comes to this, Safeway workers, et cetera. And I am very disappointed in the state. And I don't know if it would be something the board could do if we should just do it individually on our own as, you know, members of the public, but the state needs to do a better job. They could open tomorrow, essential workers, because I don't know as far as district staff, but I know my guys all carried letters that they were essential workers given by the company because of the issues with the curfews. So that issue is not a problem. We control, ACWD can control a small work group environment that if vaccines were available, we could get them done. We can get them done tomorrow or next week. Now, we wouldn't want to do everybody all together, but certainly over a matter of a month, we could vaccinate our entire staff that wanted to get it. That would solve their problem. So I'm very frustrated by this. I listen frequently on the radio regarding these because I'm in it. And yes, I see ours are going up. At my office, they're going up. We've been scrambling a couple times to keep trains running. And, you know, it doesn't seem to me that our state, and I don't know who to talk to, or the county seems to be in touch with what the heck is going on out there. They could solve this. I noticed we're not even having our employees until phase 3. Transportation's in phase 2. Our guys at ACWD should be right in there in phase 3. And I don't know if the rest of the board feels like me, but that's how I feel personally. I think our guys should be in phase 2. I think we should be vocal about it. And because otherwise we're going to end up in phase 4. So that's how I feel. I'm very passionate about this because I see it. I'm involved in it. You know, sometimes I take advantage and work from home, but no, I was in the office today. But the thing is, my guys that are on the trains, they don't have a choice. They're in the field. They face some people that we wouldn't want to face. Bus drivers, same thing. And here the state is opening to 65 and over, who I don't think are running trains for the most part, or driving buses, or working in a safe way. Those are the people we should be targeting. And to the staff and people that are watching that, you know, these numbers, they're not terrible. They're consistent with what others are going through. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Gunther. Just a couple of things to add. I know that utility workers now are in, I think they call it phase 1C, which might equate to phase 3. There's a significant effort to get us moved into phase 1B. And that's being led by Aqua, is working on that, as well as AWWA. So there are efforts to try to get essential and critical workers moved up on the list. So that is ongoing, for what it's worth.
Bob, a question on that. Is there any support that ACWD as a district can lend to those efforts, whether it be writing a letter or signing on to an existing letter?
We haven't been requested to sign on to an existing or a new letter, but certainly I don't think it would hurt to contact our local legislators. And if you'd like, we can draft something up. I can do some further exploration to see if the sort of the Bay Area agencies could get together to make a pitch to the governor. So if that is the pleasure of the board, then I can definitely get on that next week for sure.
Any directors have any thoughts?
I have some comments, but is responding to that point. All right, if I might, let me ask that we investigate group tests. We have relatively few positive hits. And it's been suggested you can greatly reduce your cost from $175 a test. If you were to test 10, 20, 30 tests at one time, and only if you have a hit do you go back and try to isolate where the party was that actually was or parties that are COVID positive. Next, even with the vaccination, it's been suggested that you will remain a potential carrier and transmitter of COVID-19. You may not get sick, but you'll still be a potential carrier, and the same protocols, even with universal vaccination, will probably have to be kept in place. Next is the JPIA's presentation in December pointed out that their major cost impact for the long-term care had employees that were in intensive care for over 60 days, and the cost of that was extraordinary. And it was a small number of employees who are in long-term intensive care that drove up the cost in responding to COVID. And finally, when we talk about vaccination programs or even testing programs, that we include members of the family to the greatest extent possible. This is a communicable disease that someone will, if they pick it up, and which is presumed to be work-related, and arguably, even if a member of their family gets COVID-19, the district could be responsible. So that we should be looking at expanding the testing and vaccination program to as wide a group of associates of the individuals as possible. Thank you.
I support the testing. I support actually the saliva testing. However, we need to be careful. I've been hearing that the latest strain may not be located by some of the testing. It's got to do with how they do their tests. And that's just something I think we need to keep our eyes on.
Fine.
Thank you for those comments. I did want to ask a question, but before I do that, should the board decide that we want to lobby our local legislators to move utilities employees into tier 1B, I'd certainly be in favor of that. However the district decides to proceed with that, I would be in favor of some type of effort in that regard. The question I have for our general manager is how are we comparing from our operational environment with other local agencies like East Bay Mud or USD? Are they seeing similar numbers in terms of employees testing positive? Are they having the same operational challenges? How do we compare?
So my information isn't absolutely super current, but I can kind of give qualitative information. I think ACWD is doing similarly to USD locally. Contra Costa, I think, might be having a little more positives as a percentage than us. And relative to East Bay Mud, I was on a conference call earlier today. Their general manager was involved. It sounds like while their numbers are much, much higher, it seemed reasonably proportional to what we're experiencing as well. If you want to be scared, go down to Southern California. The numbers there are significantly higher. On that call was a representative from LADWP. And LADWP has had an interesting strategy. What they've done is immediately, as soon as they can, try to get their employees back physically at work. So they've been kind of bouncing their employees between work and work from home. And I think that strategy has been, it may have resulted in some of the experiences that they're having, as well as, in my view, it's probably more disruptive to employees because they can't plan as effectively.
What's the motivation behind their strategy? Are they having difficulty managing employees working from home, or is this simply just a policy decision?
As I understand it, it's a policy cultural position where leadership
Okay,
at the agency feels it's important for employees to engage physically.
understood. Okay. Great. Any other questions? Any questions from the members of the public? Hearing none, I will move us on to the next item, but I will just say that I, as always, appreciate the work that all of our district staff and district leadership are putting to make sure that we continue to provide a great service to our customers and continue to keep our employees as safe as possible. So I greatly appreciate the work that goes into that.
Thank you. The next item to share under the general manager's reports item for the board is district issued devices for board members. So Mr. Stevenson will explain what staff has in mind for the board to help you do your jobs as effectively as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver, and good evening, board and public. This is a very brief item just to give you a little bit of a glimpse into your future. And we'll step through the next slide. And in doing so, we have to first take a quick look at sort of the past. As you know, the board's been issued Microsoft Surface devices for use in paperless board meetings and being able to conduct a board's business remotely. Those Surface devices, most of them are reaching the end of their supportable and maintainable life. And so we're looking at replacing that functionality, but in doing so, looking to solve some of the issues that we've had experienced over the last several years since those have been issued. On the right side of this slide, you can see a little bit of a glimpse into your future. And as Mr. Shaver points out, that future is a little bit uncertain as to when it may happen. But at such time as the board returns to the boardroom, you'll find that you've been equipped, each director has been equipped with what we call an all-in-one PC at your spot at the dais. And so that's really what can replace the functionality of the surfaces that you've been lugging around between home and the district headquarters. And so that's what we can use to present presentation materials and have your board packet and so forth, all loaded locally on the all-in-one PC, which means some of the functionality of the Surface isn't really needed anymore in terms of having that ability to do certain work both at home and at the district. And so what we're planning on doing, and if Mr. Warren, you could advance one slide. What we're planning on doing is in conjunction with the all-in-one PC at the dais, furnishing the board with iPads to replace the Surfaces. And that solves a number of issues with regard to updating software and some of the technical issues we've had with the Surfaces. The iPad is, we can equip it with what we call a company portal, which is sort of previously configured and furnished software. Makes passwords a little bit easier. That's been a bit of a challenge, credentials and passwords. You can configure the device to recognize your face and log in for you. And so some of those issues are alleviated. It works great with Zoom for the environment that we're in now. And you may be used to some of the functionality given that the board's all been issued, district issued iPhones for telephone communication, smartphones. From the district standpoint, it gives us a little bit more control over the device itself, ensuring that we can update software and push out updates remotely, automatically. We don't need the board to then bring the devices in occasionally to have them updated and patched. So we can stay a little bit more current on security updates and so forth. But we would still have Surfaces and laptops available should directors need them to attend a meeting or a conference if there is business that you need to do and you need that kind of functionality in a mobile way. So that's where we're headed right now, taking back our Surfaces and exchanging them for iPads. And so we expect to be reaching out to individual directors over the next few weeks. There's no huge rush here, but to arrange for the exchange and then any sort of training or orientation you desire on the iPad itself. So with that, I'll be happy to address any questions, but again, that's a little bit of a glimpse into your future.
Wonderful. Any questions from board members? Questions or comments?
I have a quick question. So the iPad would come with, I assume, a Bluetooth keyboard, detachable keyboard, as shown in the picture? Because
Correct.
I type my emails. It's a little bit too hard to use two finger and peck at the screen. So perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very much the same as me, and yes, we would have the it'd be the same exact device that you see there in the photo.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Great. Any other questions or comments? If not, I think we are completing this item as well.
Yeah,
Thank you,
so
Ed.
on that particular item, the train is leaving the station, to quote one of the directors. So speak now. But we think you'll have a better experience.
Hopefully it has.
Well,
a
I for
crew.
one definitely appreciate the iPad's UI far more than the Surfaces. So I think I'm looking forward to the change. All right. Are there any other general managers reports?
Yeah, two super quick ones. The district has a long track record of winning awards, and Mr. Stevenson is going to quickly let us know what the latest award that the district has won.
Yeah, and I just I'm very honored to bring this to the board on behalf of our IT division and all the folks throughout the district that work on this topic. This is the third consecutive year that we've won this award, and if we were in the board room, I could show this to you a little bit easier, but you're just gonna have to take my word for it as I try and show it on my screen here. I'm not having a whole lot of luck, but this is the Award for Excellence in Information Technology Practices from the Municipal Information Systems Association of California. And I'll just read you just a couple of excerpts from the letter that we received recently. On behalf of the Municipal Information Systems Association of California, or MISAC, we are proud to recognize agencies for implementing information technology practices that excel in creative and efficient uses of local government resources. This award signifies that your agency met or exceeded MISAC standards in the technology-focused areas of budget and strategic planning, purchasing, operations and staffing, customer satisfaction, internet, project management, professional development and training, disaster preparation and recovery, policies and procedures, security, and GIS. You may remember from last year, this is a pretty in-depth audit of our entire IT program. And so it's quite an accomplishment, and it's really kudos to our IT staff. This is the second year that we've been able to achieve the top level, that's the excellence level. And each year, we very much appreciate the feedback that we get through this process, because we essentially fold potential improvements into our planning for the following year. So we're very much pleased to receive the award again. And again, really kudos to particularly our IT manager, Aris Nakvi, his staff, and others throughout the district who help us keep our IT program in tip-top shape. So that's all that I had on that topic.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. That's great news. And then lastly, just wanted to remind the board that we have a board workshop, special board meeting on January 28th. That's a Thursday. And I will be taking the afternoon off tomorrow and will not be in cell phone contact. So if anything comes up, Mr. Arenz, Ms. Heides, or Mr. Wunderlich will be happy to attend to any of your executive staff related questions or needs. So with that, that concludes GM reports.
Wonderful, thank you. And Mr. Stevenson, please congratulate the IT team, Aris, and all of the folks who work with him on an excellent achievement. Something to be very, very proud of.
Will do. Thank you.
Great. Let us move on to director's comments, reports on meetings attended, and agenda item requests. Why don't we start with Director Weed?
Director Weed, you're on mute.
Director Weed.
This time.
There
We
you
need
go.
only report on those of which we receive compensation. So I don't recall any of this last month which I was compensated for attending. I have been asked to serve on the Risk Management Committee of the JPIA, which I've accepted. That first meeting will be in February. And the per diem at the JPIA is $312 per diem per day. So I would, that could be put into our thought process of where the industry has gone as far as per diems are concerned. Next, I wish to apply for the executive board of the JPIA that requires the support of not only your own board, but at least 2 other boards. It's a total of 3. And I'll be, the assumption, with the presumption that I will receive support from my board for that position, I will then proceed to ask for the others. It's early March is the deadline for getting in the application. The current board is, all the incumbents on the executive board intend to run for re-election, is my understanding. So it's somewhat of a placeholder, putting your name in the list as should they ever have an appointment again midterm. 218. We declined to pursue a 218 at the last board meeting. However, I don't think it was emphasized enough that in a drought, we have lost the ability of doing staged rates until we issue another Proposition 218. And this year is looking very dry. When the social media kicks in, we've seen, because of this leveraged rates not having our variable and fixed cost in sync with our variable and fixed income, dramatic changes in our cash flow and responsibilities. So I would encourage us to consider a 2-year 218 with no rate increase in the first year. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Weed. Let's move on to Director Sethi.
No reports or requests from me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Sethi. How about Director Huang?
Nothing from me. Thank you.
Thank you. And Director Gunther?
Nothing from me either.
Great. And nothing from my end either. Wonderful. All right, let us move on to item 8, closed session. Pursuant to California Government Code section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators. Agency designated negotiators are Robert Shaver, Jennifer Solito, Jonathan Wunderlich, and Stacy Q. Employee organizations are Operating Engineers Local 3 and ACWD Operators Association. And with that, we will adjourn into closed session.
Okay, and President Apari, just give me a moment to round everybody up into the breakout room.
Yes, take your time.
Thank you.
And I will just take a moment. All right, do we have all of our directors? I think so. Okay, great. It is now 8:55 p.m. And the board has concluded their closed session and has provided guidance to our labor negotiators. Is there any other report out, Mr. Shaver?
Well, I think we should read what the closed session item was fully, just to make sure that we get it clear for the record. So
Absolutely.
I'm happy to do so if you wouldn't mind.
Please.
Okay, so in closed session pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with the labor negotiators, agency designated negotiators were Robert Shaver, Jennifer Solito, Jonathan Wunderlich, and Stacy Q. Employee organizations were Operating Engineers Local 3 and ACWD Operators Association. And in closed session, the board provided direction to its negotiators. And that concludes the closed session report.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Shaver. And with that, at 8:57 p.m., we can adjourn our board meeting tonight. Thank you, everyone.